latest that's coming in. President Donald Trump says that US airstrikes had completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities and threatened more attacks if Tehran does not make peace. Now, let's hear to what he had to say.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Right, and to get us more details, we're being joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani from New York. Susan, during President Trump's address just a little while ago, he has said that if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. And he's also warned that without peace, there will be tragedy for Iran that will far exceed what's just taken place. Now, what can we expect in the hours coming forward? And we also know that there's going to be a military briefing on Sunday where more details will be given out. But for now, how do we make sense of the statements that's just come out of President's address just a little while ago?
Yeah, President Trump really delivered a very strong message once again to Iran. He again stressed that Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan, Iran's nuclear capabilities have been eliminated. He called it a spectacular military success. He also talked about, as you mentioned, that if Iran doesn't behave, and not so many words, then there will be more targets. And we're thinking he's possibly talking about Iran's military installations. There are other targets, of course, as well, many other ones that the United States can target. As he mentioned, these were the most difficult, but nonetheless, it also signals that while there was sort of this understanding that the United States would go in there once and get rid of these nuclear sites, then now President Trump is saying there's a possibility that the United States might go in again. That's a pretty big deal, considering the fact that many hoped that this would sort of be a one-and-done thing, just because President Trump was so keen on and insistent on saying that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Now that these installations have been eliminated, the United States wouldn't get involved once again. But it appears that's not the case. It depends, at least from the White House perspective, on what Iran will do next.
Right, absolutely, Susan. And now from Iran's perspective, nothing exceptional has happened. Iran said that it has been anticipating an attack on the Fordo nuclear site for several nights now, and that the site had been already evacuated some time ago. So now going forward, the question is, how is Iran going to react and respond?
Yeah, that's the main question, and we have to realistically try to understand where Iran stands right now. If in an event that something like this happens for Iran, those top generals that would be making decisions right now for the country and the next military move, well, they've all been eliminated. Sure, they've been replaced, but the main ones have all been eliminated by Israel. So you have that decision-making apparatus, which has been significantly weakened. You have Iran's proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, to a certain extent those in Iraq, but the Houthis seem to be operating. Many of those have been weakened as well in the region. And then you also really have Iranian skies, which it appears that is in control of Israel's hands. So Iran is in a weakened position right now. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't retaliate. There are 40,000 U.S. troops across the region. It still has the missiles in its capacity to target Israel. And one of the most important things that Iran controls is the Strait of Hormuz. One of the main concerns is that in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran can start planting mines. That's not very costly. Iran doesn't have to be very powerful to be able to do that. That is a region that it controls itself, but that could disrupt not only the United States, it could disrupt international trade, shipping, oil prices around the world. So it does have some cards in its hands. The question is, when Iranian officials, those that have come out, they say that not significant damage has been done to Fordo, and they're trying to make this assessment as something that was minor. One has to wonder whether or not this is a prelude to what kind of retaliatory measures they're capable and willing to take, or are they really thinking about coming to the negotiating table for just for talks or for some kind of peace, whatever that seems to mean at this point in time. It's very elusive.
Absolutely, Susan. And U.S. strikes have triggered a seismic shift in the war, and especially in the relationship between Iran and Israel, and it carries potentially huge implications for American security. As you just mentioned, there are around 40,000 American troops stationed in this region, and they will be on extremely high alert. And just yesterday, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen had threatened that they would resume attacks on American ships in the Red Sea if the U.S. got militarily involved in Iran. Now, in the eventuality that it has happened now, there is going to be a huge fear of Iranian retaliation on American and the military assets in the region. And now we know that this is not just a war between Israel and Iran, but the entire region would be affected. What do you think the implications are going to look like going forward?
The regional countries are definitely concerned right now. They will be on high alert. A lot of these military bases, of course, are in Iran's Arab neighbors and in very close proximity to their countries as well. So regional countries right now are assessing the risk as well. They're assessing the damage. I'm sure the White House's phone lines are going to be going off with different leaders from the region reaching out. But also the question is, what about the Europeans? Were they in on this sort of attack that was supposed to happen tonight? Did they sort of have those negotiations with Iran's foreign minister, knowing that the United States was going to do this? We don't know that. Where does Europe stand right now? Not to say that Europe has much pull when it comes to the United States, but nonetheless, despite the fact that they've been saying that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, they've been very adamant on continuing some kind of negotiation. Now, the United States at this point that we're talking says that Iran doesn't have a nuclear program anymore, and it's not a threat. But nonetheless, you never know. There are some questions that we need answers to sort of, first of all, gauge what Iran's response would be. And second of all, the United States says that it's already in phase 2 of this operation tonight, and that's to keep its assets safe in the Middle East. Again, Iran has some options, and it could inflict damage. And right now, President Trump has the American people, for the most part, behind his back when it comes to the nuclear issue in Iran. If it goes beyond that, he doesn't have the public support. I can tell you that completely.
Absolutely, Susan. And also, in his Truth Social post announcing what he said were successful U.S. strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites, the American president concluded by writing that now is the time for peace. Now, Susan, do you think that outlook may be a little too optimistic given the trajectory we're on right now?
I'm sorry, you broke up. What was the question?
Susan, I was just trying to ascertain that President Trump has claimed that the strikes were successful, and now having carried out the strikes, he thinks that now is the time for peace. I just want to understand from you, is this outlook a little too optimistic at this point, given the trajectory that we're on and there's no sign of de-escalation?
Right. And what does peace even mean at this point? Is Israel going to stop its attacks against Iran? That sounds very unlikely. What kind of surrender is President Trump looking for on the part of Iran? And can the Iranian leadership really afford to do that? I was thinking earlier, and I mentioned this, Iran has been very resilient when it has its back against the wall, despite, for example, you think about the Iran-Iraq war, where the entire world back in the 1980s was behind Saddam Hussein. And somehow Iran managed to endure this war for a period of 8 years on its own. And ultimately, when Iran was losing and the revolution at that time was in jeopardy, then Iran's leader at that time, Khomeini, came and said that I have to have this potion of poison in order to keep Iran intact, because the country was falling apart, essentially, and he was afraid that the revolution that they just did a few years ago would all go to waste. Is Khamenei going to do that? Is he going to drink the potion of poison for national security reasons? Does he have the rally of his top apparatus around him to agree with that? Or are there going to be cracks in Iran's government on how to deal with the United States at this point? Peace is very, as I mentioned, elusive at this point. What does that even look like? And where do we go from here? And how is that even attainable at this point?
Right, Susan, and we know that 2 weeks turned out to be 2 days, and on Thursday, Trump gave the Iranians a deadline that if they wanted to avoid a U.S. strike on its nuclear facilities, but we know now that the deadline turned out to be much shorter than expected. And was that a clear stratagem at play from the U.S. side to actually let the Iranians loosen up a little bit before the strikes actually can cause some significant damage? Now, going forward, do you think the Iranians have also gotten a sense of the play that is happening right now, and they are already anticipating, as they've already mentioned, that they had anticipated this attack? How do you think are they preparing for the further attacks that now Trump has just mentioned? How do you think Iran is preparing for it, but also Americans, because clearly the American citizens are not happy with the trajectory that the war is taking right now, and US's complicity and full involvement at this point?
Yeah, well, American people, for the most part, were okay with Iran not having a nuclear weapon, and if the president can really ultimately convince the American public and Congress that there was a clear and present danger to America's national security or its troops in the region, and that's why Iran got involved. But you're absolutely right. Moving forward, there just is not an appetite for some kind of another forever war, and the United States being bogged down in the Middle East for another 20, 30 years, and U.S. troops on the ground, U.S. troops being killed, and also that, sense that somehow, even if this is Israel and Iran's war, the United States every now and then just goes in Iran and starts bombing Iran. And that's just not sustainable. It's not attainable. And I think that President Trump knows this. I doubt that his vision is to get the United States bogged down. But, if Iran decides to retaliate, notably on U.S. troops, then there is no choice, and the United States is involved. And at this point, what we're hearing from Iranian officials, the few that have come out and talked, they're saying that America is going to pay a price. Now, what does that retaliation look like? It may not be very heavily kinetic right now because they're in shock. They're trying to get, their bases together. But ultimately, Iran has proven that it could damage U.S. interests in the long run, on the one hand. And second of all, the director of FBI, Kash Patel, just warned that the FBI is monitoring sleeper cells here in the United States. The NYPD, for example, tonight is on high alert. What does that mean? Is there going to be attack on U.S. soil now that there was an attack on Iranian soil on the part of the United States? So these are all very valid and concerning questions that, as I mentioned, despite the fact that Iran has been severely weakened, you really can't underestimate the amount of damage that it could do if, there are avenues that it could really retaliate. Like you mentioned, we have to wait and see the damage assessment from Iran and for it to see whether or not it's worth it to go in a full-out war against the United States or whether or not it's going to wait and then carry out attacks as it has in the past against U.S. troops, which are surprise attacks. Or there's going to be cracks in the Iranian government. I mean, that's a huge possibility right now. There was a hearing on Congress, a private hearing behind closed doors, that there are discussions right now that should the Iranian government fall, what would be the next step, and how should the United States, who should the United States support? So these are all questions that are being asked.
And these are all very important questions, Susan. And we know that for Iran, it is going to be extremely difficult to absorb such a massive blow. The credibility of the Iranian government, which has been threatened by this enormous response, is at stake now. And there's also no guarantee that if Iran does not respond, Israel will stop its attack to bring down the Iranian regime, or that the U.S. will not join in again. So given these situations still exist and the war could go either way, how do you think Iran is going to respond now? What is the course that they should be taking at this point?
As I mentioned, we have to see what their damage assessment is, and they have options. They have the Strait of Hormuz. They could do major retaliatory strikes still against Israel. They still have some 500 missiles left, according to assessments, that can reach Israel. They do have other missiles. Of course, their missile capabilities, I mean, it's hard to make clear whether or not the missile launchers really, how much of them work right now. But they do have capabilities to reach Israel to a certain extent, and then they have other missiles that can, in the immediate vicinity of Iran's borders, they can easily target those as well. But the Houthis are probably one of Iran's proxies that are the most effective, perhaps, for lack of a better word, right now. You have Jaish al-Islam in Iraq to a certain extent as well, but, forces like Hezbollah or even Hamas, these have been weakened. So it's hard to imagine that it would be anything around Israel. If it's going to be to Israel, it's going to be directly from Iran, but then, those regional misadventures could absolutely happen. And again, I can't stress enough how much power Iran has over the Strait of Hormuz right now.
Right, Susan, and we've also seen reactions coming in from the American side as well, where they say that American people do not want another war, and they've seen decades of endless war in the Middle East before. And now, having said that, do you think President Trump's address was able to justify the actions, or the citizens would be convinced of the scale of escalation that we're seeing at the moment?
That's the thing. The majority of the American public, poll after poll, they agree at this point that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. They believe that it's a direct threat to America's national security and American interests. But going to war and fighting this war, which many of them believe that was Israel's war against Iran and not America's war against Iran. And the United States had no business being in it. They just don't want that. There is no appetite for that war. You can talk to Democrats who are anti-war. You can talk to Republicans who are very isolationist and just not just anti-war. They just want America to mind its own business and let the world and its misadventures just go by as they do, and for the American leadership to focus on issues in the United States. Many believe that was the first promise of the MAGA movement, the Make America Great movement of Donald Trump. Of course, President Trump says that America first means peace through strength, and it means that you would have to take actions like this. So, there's a lot of debate around that, but ultimately, you're absolutely right. There's just not that appetite on the part of the American people, and not those in Congress as well. You will see Republicans rally around Donald Trump for this action that he took. This is considered to be successful. He's not going to lose a lot of support for what he just did tonight. It's what happens after this that's very important. This is the hard part now. That are you going to just step back now and let it be, and Israel, Iran, they can fight it out, whatever that is, or are you going to get America involved and bogged down in the Middle East? And that is the last thing that anyone here wants.